Welcome back to the Canine Campus Podcast. This is episode number 22, and this week we're following up on our last show discussing unwanted behavior. We talked about a recent study from UPenn, which indicated the use of punishment can lead to aggression. This month, the American Veterinary Society of Animal Behavior released a position statement on punishment consistent with the UPenn study, so we're going to talk about that in a minute. But first, we're going to start with some listener thanks and questions. Devin, how are you doing?
Well, and how about you?
I'm very good, thanks.
We have a new dog that we took in.
We welcome Roomba to the pack.
We welcome Roomba Boomba to the pack. So our first question is from Adam in Ogden, Utah. Here's his question.
Hi, Stace. Hi, Devin. My name's Adam. I live in Ogden, Utah, and me and my wife are both new to your podcast. We're really enjoying them, and we do have one quick question for you today. We have two female boxers. One is 1.5 years, and the other is a year. So we have lots of really exciting situations that we go through. But one of the things we've been looking into doing is trying to allow them to roam freely throughout the house while we're away, as opposed to keeping them crated. We were wondering if you had any tips or pointers that would help us to make that transition, so that we can avoid as many disasters as possible. So if you can help us out, we'd love to hear from you, and we look forward to your podcasts and any other information you guys post on your website. So thank you much. Bye.
This is an excellent question because I think transition periods are always really hard to figure out. There's always a before and an after, but the middle is always a little confusing. So to set yourself up for success, I would make sure first and foremost that your dogs associate your leaving with really good things. So I'm not sure if when Adam and everyone's leaving the house and the dogs are currently crated, that they're crated with something to do like a food toy.
Right.
But I would definitely establish that for a couple of weeks so that, when you leave, good things happen.
Right.
Therefore, when you leave them outside of the crate, they have something appropriate to do. Mm-hmm. Also, you want to start out short periods. So do not leave them the first time for 8 hours. You want to leave them for 20 minutes, half an hour, 40 minutes when you're running errands on the weekend. Also, you need to make a bigger area, but that still limits their access to the house completely.
So this doesn't mean a larger crate, but maybe gates?
Right.
Like
Baby
that.
Gates are a great way to do it. Some people have laundry rooms. I like areas that also have the gates in it. So like, the kitchen sometimes have gates in it, and then you can baby gate them in the kitchen. And that way you can sort of dog proof that particular area.
Right.
They get a little bit more freedom. And the reason why I like having the crates in there is what you're trying to do is expand the dog's concept of the crate, and it really helps if the crate is part of that. So that, ideally they'd be baby gated in the kitchen with their crates open so they still had access to their crate. Kitchen would be dog proofed, and they're given something legitimate and appropriate to do.
Great.
And that's my advice for that transition period.
Well, guys, let us know how that works out. So start slow and, short periods.
Right. And then gradually increase the period of time that you're gone. And when they're totally solid for, 6 to 8 hours in the kitchen, then you can start thinking about incorporating slightly larger areas. So first you want to increase duration in the dog-proof kind of safe zone. Once that's done, and when you increase the area, go back to decreasing the time. So you might be up to 6 to 8 hours in the kitchen. If you start including the living room, go back to half an hour, 45 minutes. You'll be able to move much faster than you did just with the kitchen, but start small.
So not everything at once is a big part.
Not everything at once. Break it up.
And who else? Oh, I think we got some emails this week, right?
We did get some emails this week. We have some thank yous. We got an email from, and I apologize if I'm not pronouncing your name correctly, Basiliza. And she found a lot of help with our podcasts on grooming and nail clipping. She's been apparently just clipping up a storm down there in Texas where she lives. So
Fantastic.
Good job. And Deanne emailed us. She's got a deaf dog, and she would like a future podcast on the training of deaf dogs. I sent her a lengthy email. We won't go into all the details of it here. However, I think what's essential when you're working with deaf dogs is you must have a way to get their attention.
Right.
We just did a show on attention not too long ago. And what seems to be the most reliable way to do it is a vibrating collar. And I just think it's essential.
And you've had a deaf dog or two in a Canine campus.
Yes, I've trained a number of deaf dogs, and there's a wonderful deaf dog. I think it's the Deaf Dog Action League. I should have looked this up. It's a website,
right.
which is a great resource for people because there's great books there. If you're looking for a vibrating collar, they've done a bunch of product testing, which I think is really important.
Right.
So, I mean, her question was actually about using hand signals and having hand signals. I mean, basically, you can have a hand signal for every single behavior. So there's nothing you can't teach a deaf dog, but it's all predicated on getting the deaf dog to look at you to give them that sign.
Because it is all visual, but at the same time, what I really noticed about the deaf dogs that you were working with in classes was the training strategy was pretty much the same thing. It was just a different reward marker. For instance. So
thumbs up instead of a click.
But it was a visual thing. And so attention is a big part of that. And we'll post a link to the Deaf Dog Action League that's going to have
great. Because that's the first place I go to when people have questions. Terry sent us an email about resource guarding. She's been working on the problem with her dog and sent some advice on that. So I hope that is going well. And Tammy emailed us. She wanted some information on raw diets. We do feed our dogs a raw diet.
Right.
We've sort of talked about this a little bit in the past. There's some good books out there. Dr. Ian Billingquist, who's an Australian vet, has written some books on this. He kind of got the ball rolling and I believe came up with the unfortunate acronym BARF, Bones and Raw Food.
Right.
But there's plenty of people in the U.S. that have written some books on this too. And perhaps we will devote a future show to this. There's actually a vet in our area now who really digs raw diets, and perhaps we'll get her on to talk about it as well.
And there's a really interesting article on Wikipedia if you just look up barf diet on that.
Oh, really?
It's got great background on it, kind of great history. I'm not really sure about the external links. We'll at least post that to our podcast. And, of course, you can always Google the rest, right?
Right. And I think also keep in mind that if your dogs are on a raw diet, supplements are required.
Right.
More often than not, especially if you're buying a pre-made raw diet versus making your own, because if you're making your own, you might just be putting the supplemental stuff in it. We buy raw diets for the most part and raw diet mixes, and so we do have different supplements.
Right. And as always, consult your vet.
And Whole Dog Journal every year does a really good they do 3 issues or 4 issues on food, and they rate dry food, canned food, raw food, mixed food. And so there's some really good information there too.
Right.
We've sent people to Whole Dog Journal in the past. Bob from Illinois is interested in certification. And so he sent a question about that and sort of the best paths to certification. And I hope that from the sounds of it, he's well on his way.
Excellent.
And
good work, Bob.
Hopefully he'll let us know how that goes. Then we got an email from Diane, who's a big fan, and out in California. And she had lots of great recommendations for future shows. She was interested in having a show on cafe manners. If you can take your dog out and about, what are some of the basic manners that your dog should have? Of course, as she referenced in her email, the problem is usually not your dog's manners, but the other people at the cafe.
Right, yeah,
manners.
exactly.
So that's always a question. And she, also dog parks, she was hoping for a podcast on. And she has some recommendations on biking with your dogs and equipment to use there. So that's something that we should look into. And then we got posted where you can download our podcast. Sonia has a cattle dog, and she's dealing with some fear issues. And apparently she's been using Patricia McConnell's publications. My bet is, I see the fearful dog on the cover of that, and I can't remember the name of it. Anyway, she's been using Patricia McConnell's publications to address that, and you cannot go wrong with Patricia McConnell at all. Who apparently is thinking of doing a podcast, hopefully sometime in June. Won't that be fabulous?
If it comes out, we'll post a link to that for sure.
It'd be so fabulous. So in regards to her cattle dog, her under-socialized cattle dog that sounds like she's done a lot of really good work with, so good job, Sonia. Keep up the good work. Now she's starting to show some reactivity to small dogs and puppies especially particularly timid ones. And I think what's really hard about reactivity when it's not consistent, like, oh, it's every man he sees versus, every once in a while it's a man.
Right.
What's critical is that you do your counter conditioning and your desensitizing to all small dogs and puppies, whether they react to them or not. Mm-hmm. And in fact, you can get a lot of work done in your counter conditioning and desensitization program if you're in the presence of a non-trigger dog. So in other words, if you can form, if she already has some positive association with some small dogs, you can reinforce that using this program, and that gives you a much better shot of dealing with the reactivity when a trigger comes into play. Since you can't, so my point is, Sonia, don't try to mind read your dog and guess if that particular dog's going to set her off or not. Act as if all small dogs will, all small puppies will, and work the program.
You'll have a much higher rate of success.
Much higher rate of success. And secondly, she points out that Zoe becomes so emotional that it's impossible to gain control over her, that she's frantic and doesn't hear commands and doesn't take treats. And I think she states this really well, where she says she and whatever is threatening her are all that exists in her world at that time. And of course, that is a perfect description of what happens when fear triggers your amygdala in your brain and your brain takes over.
Right.
She literally can't hear the commands, much less process them. And the last thing you want to do when you're freaked out is eat.
Right. Yeah.
So the question is, what can I do to gain control of my dog if needed? And this is where I think a gentle leader head collar can be so essential. Mm-hmm. I recommend them for the vast majority of my reactivity cases. For starters, they can give dogs a certain amount of confidence because it takes some of the responsibility of decision-making off of them. Yeah. Secondly, they are the quickest, fastest way to control a dog's position, direction, without causing any pain or discomfort.
Right.
So, other forms of leashes and collars that cause pain, if pain is induced at the moment they see the trigger and they go out of control, that just reinforces that the trigger's bad.
Right.
What's great about the gentle leader is it can get the dog out of there. You can U-turn, you can get greater distance, which is essential when you've got a reaction to a trigger, without pain. Of course, you need to take the time to desensitize the dog to wearing the gentle leader. So my advice to you is think about your equipment. And that's going to be essential in getting your dog out of there. You're not going to gain control of them until you can get them far enough away from the trigger that they can become present again in their body. I also highly recommend T-Touch, therapeutic massage. That can really help a dog learn to stay grounded. There are also essential oils and botanicals that someone in your area might have a lot of experience with, and that can also help dogs stay grounded.
Great. So, Devin, in that last question, you talked a little bit about choke chains and other directional control devices that really do cause punishment. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk about the American Veterinary Society of Animal Behavior's new position statement on punishment and the impact that can have on your training effectiveness. So we'll be right back. You're listening to the Canine Campus Podcast. If you want to participate in the Canine Campus Podcast, we'd really look forward to hearing from you. You can get a hold of us at caninecampus.com on the internet. We've got a new group on Facebook, and you can just search for Canine Campus on Facebook. Join our group. We're going to have updates on what's going on with the podcast, what's going on at Canine Campus. So be on the lookout for that. And if you want to get a hold of us, if you want to participate in the show, if you have a question or a suggestion, you can send us an email at podcast@caninecampus.com. You can leave a voicemail on our website, actually, at caninecampus.com, or give us a call on our message line at area code 434-973-1050. That's area code 434-973-1050. And if you'd like to sponsor the podcast, give us a shout. It's a great way to reach thousands of dog owners. We've got a new show out every 2 weeks, and give us a call and we can talk about how we can help you get in touch with some great dog people. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Canine Campus podcast. We're now going to talk about a new position statement from the American Veterinary Society of Animal Behavior. Devin, you forwarded this to me. Really fascinating stuff. Where do we start in
we start with the fact I am dancing in the streets.
Right.
I'm dancing in the streets. I'm so excited.
It's very thrilling.
Why am I excited? Because as a trainer, it doesn't matter how much education I have. It doesn't matter who I work with. When I am trying to dispel long-held dog myths, my opinion does not hold as much weight as that of a veterinarian.
Sure.
Or apparently a dog trainer on National Geographic.
Okay.
So, and monks. There's some monks thrown in there too. So What's so excited about this is, first, who are the American Veterinary Society of Animal Behavior? Well, in order to be a member of this society, you must have graduated from a school of veterinary medicine, or you must be a holder of a PhD in animal behavior or a related field from an accredited college or university. So essentially, this is an association for people that are heavily into behavior and
with academic credentials.
With academic credentials. And it's so exciting because the vet that I work with locally has for years been trying to get, she's a member of this organization, for years has been encouraging the organization to come out with a position statement against the use of punishment. And here it is. The AVSAB's position is that punishment, and an example of this would be choke chains, pinch collars, and electronic collars, should not be used as a first line or early use treatment for a behavior problem. This is due to the potential adverse effects, which include but are not limited to inhibition of learning, increased fear-related and aggressive behaviors, which the UPenn study pointed out, and injury to animals and people interacting with the animals. AVSAB recommends that training should focus on reinforcing desired behaviors, removing the reinforcer for inappropriate behaviors, and addressing the emotional state and environmental conditions driving the undesirable behavior. This approach promotes a better understanding of the pet's behavior and a better awareness of how humans may have inadvertently contributed to the development of the undesirable behavior. Punishment should only be used when the above approach has failed despite an adequate, and I underlined that and put that in bold, adequate effort as part of a larger training or behavior modification program that incorporates reinforcement of appropriate behaviors and works to change the underlying cause of the problem behavior. AVSAB recognizes that both positive reinforcement and punishment require significant skill, effort, and awareness on the owner's part. Both must be applied as the animal is performing the target behavior or within 1 second of the behavior to be most effective. Additionally, both work best when applied every time the behavior occurs so that the animal is not inadvertently rewarded for undesirable behavior during the modification process. If punishment is added to the modification plan, it should only be used if the owner has first demonstrated reasonable ability and consistency at rewarding appropriate behaviors and removing the reward for bad behaviors. If punishment is suggested as part of a complete behavior modification plan, owners should not begin using it until they have ensured that the person helping them is able to articulate the major adverse effects of punishment, judge when these effects are occurring over the short and long term, and can explain how they will reverse the adverse effects if they occur.
Quite a mouthful.
Oh, I'm so relieved. Okay, so a few highlights from my perspective. Basically, what this says is that the first line of defense should be positive reinforcement. And by the way, this is referring to positive punishment, not negative punishment. Negative punishment is what we talked about in a previous podcast about handling
taking
inappropriate.
Something away.
Right, taking something good away, like usually us.
Not adding something negative, like pain, to the environment.
What I really like about this is how much responsibility it puts on the human beings, which is exactly what dominance theories take away. You know, with the dominance theory, and we're going to talk about this in another podcast, and we talked about this with the UPenn, it's like, oh, dogs are always vying for control. There's nothing we can do about it. The only thing we can do is try to control them back.
Right.
This turns that model completely on its head and basically says, look, if you can't use positive reinforcement, in an effective and appropriate manner, you sure can't use punishment.
Right.
Because the very skills that are required to make positive reinforcement effective are required for punishment to have a chance of being effective and to minimize the adverse effects.
And a big part of that's accuracy, right?
It's all about accuracy. It's all about consistency. We've talked about timing a lot in this show. They say within 1 second, half a second is ideal.
Right. Right.
And consistency is so important. So I love this because at long last, I can now turn to a professional organization of veterinarians and PhDs and say, look, you don't have to take my word for it. These people are in this business and they're telling you this doesn't work. So the UPenn study, or they're telling you this is not the best way to go. The UPenn study gave us some conclusions. Hey, when we saw punishment used in these cases, we tended to see an increase in aggression.
Right.
But it didn't go any further than that. In other words, it didn't condemn the practice of it. It sort of left that up to the person that read the study. At long last, we have a respected organization really drawing a line in the sand about positive punishment. And again, I am dancing in the streets.
Well, it's excellent.
There'll be a link. Go check it out yourself.
There'll be a link to the PDF
I have to say,
of the position statement.
The AVSAB's website is lovely. They have a number of different position statements. We're going to be referring to some of them in the future.
Right.
It's under this, may I say, when you go to the position statement on punishment, if you follow it down, it's like 4 pages. There's the position statement itself. Then they define their terms. Then they even give the guidelines for using punishment effectively. And Ian Dunbar has done this in the past too. And if you try to meet all the criteria of using punishment correctly, effectively, it's really hard.
Right.
So I think it's a really lovely site, and I encourage people to check it out.
Well, and you know what I was so fond of in this statement was the emphasis on using positive reinforcement first. And if you can't do that, then you certainly can't do punishment.
Right. I mean, I really loved how it was like, if you can't demonstrate that you can stick with those principles, you certainly can't be unleashed with anything else.
Exactly. So, load up those treat bags. Get the clickers out.
Oh, this is a great day for positive trainers.
It is. So, and we thank the American Veterinary Society of Animal Behavior for releasing that statement, as well as everybody that wrote in. I know we didn't get to all the letters we've got. We've had a bunch of people joining the group on Facebook, and that's you can just search for Canine Campus on Facebook.
And lots of ideas for future shows. So thank you so much for all of those.
Keep them coming. The email address is podcast@caninecampus.com. You can find us on the web at caninecampus.com. Feel free to leave us a voicemail on our homepage or give us a call at area code 434-973-1050. That's 434-973-1050. We'll be back in 2 weeks with a new episode of the Canine Campus Podcast. Thanks for listening. Thank you, Devin.
Thanks, Desa.
We'll see you in a few weeks. Bye.